I mentioned I'm living in the high desert in northern New Mexico, where there are a lot of indigenous pueblos and archaeological sites. And it was in the early 90s that I was hiking through one of the archaeological sites in the Four Corners area. It's Chaco Canyon. Some people, maybe you've been there. Some people know where that is. And an indigenous man was coming the other direction. He stopped and talked to me on the path. And he began telling me a story. It was really interesting. And he said, a long time ago, people in this part of the world lived very differently. They were close to the earth. They remembered who they were. They remembered their relationship to the earth, to the sky, to the past, to the future, to time. He said, then something happened, and we don't know exactly what the something was, but people got lost. Something happened, and they began to forget who they were. And they so longed for the connection that they used to have with themselves and with one another and with the earth and with the ancestors. They began building things outside of their bodies to remind them of who they are inside of their bodies. And he said, we live in that world today. We are still cluttering our outer world with all of this technology, and everything that we're building out there in some way mirrors, mimics what we already do in here. And he said, we're going to keep doing this. We will clutter our world and clutter our lives until we come to this realization. He said, and then we will let that external technology go so the life in the world looks simpler, but we have become much more sophisticated and much more evolved beings. And I thought, wow, I thought I was just on a hike in Chaco Canyon, and that was a very, very deep philosophy. Well, I am a scientist. I'm a degreed earth scientist with a strong background in life sciences, biological sciences, and math, physics, and computer science. And I say that because it helps me to stay current, Danica, with all of the research that's not always easy to read. It's published in very obscure journals, very technical language. And life is simple, nature is simple, science is simple, until we make it complex with this language and with the formulas and the math. If you want to engineer it, you need those things, but to understand it, you do not. So I have the opportunity to stay current with the discoveries, and all the new discoveries are confirming what that native man said to me, that we are literally a soft technology. So let me share what that means, and then I'm going to tie that into the answer about the simulation. The average human body, we're told, has about 50 trillion or so cells, give or take. When I was in school back in the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, I was taught that those cells were like little sacks of salt water, saline. There's some other stuff going on, but nothing like what we know today. Now we know that every one of those 50 trillion cells has about 0.07 volts of electrical potential. And you say, well, that's not very much, and you're right. But you do the math, 50 trillion cells times 0.07 volts. I've done this so many times, I'll tell you, is 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential. Now, if you could harness that and direct that to states of healing or intuition or extraordinary states of cognition or resilience or building a powerful immune system, man, who doesn't want that, in the age of COVID? But it doesn't stop there, because every one of those cells also functions and essentially is in our body. It's a capacitor. It's a resistor. It's a transistor. These are all electrical components that massage electrical information. Every cell in our body receives photons of light that is information and energy. And we not only receive it, we transmit. We are constantly transmitting photons of light into this field that we haven't talked about yet, that underlies all existence. We are in direct communication. It's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation with this field. Every cell in our body, the surface of because of COVID, everybody knows what a cell looks like now, and about the receptors on the cells. Those receptors are antenna, and they are constantly receiving light information and electrical and magnetic information. The DNA in the nucleus of our cells, our antenna, essentially, the genes that make up the DNA, our antenna to higher frequencies. We are gated circuits. All of this is a very, very different way of looking at the human body. And this is where we go back to the first part of this conversation. We are the only form of life, Danica, that we know of today. There may be others elsewhere in the cosmos, I'm sure there are, but we're the only form of life on Earth that has the ability to self-regulate all of this soft technology and to do it consciously, at will, and on demand. Other forms of life may do it by instinct. We're the only form of life that can sit down in a chair in a moment in time and say, in this moment, I choose to access this soft technology within me and create a stronger immune system, or awaken my anti-aging and longevity enzymes. Who doesn't want that? We're the only form of life that can do this. We are technology. We are a soft technology interfacing with a field of energy and information that modern science is only beginning to acknowledge. So we begin to think from that perspective. Now I'm going to go back. There's an emerging philosophy that everything that we create, that consciousness informs itself through its creations. So that means everything that we create in the world out there is telling us something about ourselves in here. And it's a mind blower. It's a really interesting way of thinking. So all the art, all the sculptures, all the music. I'm a musician when I'm not being an author. All the music that we create, the movies, Hollywood. Look at the films that people are most drawn to, the blockbusters, and look at the themes of those films. The Matrix, for example, told us that there's a world that we can't see that we participate in that influences a world that we can see. The movie Avatar reminded us of our relationship to nature and the natural world. Inception was all about dreams and dreams within dreams. And the young people, I love this. Young people are so turned on, man. They are fired up over the superheroes, the Avengers and Wonder Woman, all reminding them that there is a potential within them that maybe they have yet to fully tap, that we have abilities that we're only beginning to understand. So if consciousness informs itself through its creations, then that principle would extend to the technology. So I am not surprised that the internet that we built mimics our neural networks within our bodies.
Oh, okay.
I'm not surprised that blockchain technology that is revolutionizing finance and what money even means in the world, and bringing peace to nations because they don't have to compete for natural resources for the old kinds of money we used to think about. I'm not surprised that blockchain technology mimics human DNA. In a blockchain technology, there is a record of every transaction that has ever occurred from the very first transaction. In our genome is a record of every genetic transaction that has ever transpired from the time that we first emerged on this planet. So this is such a powerful principle. Consciousness informs itself through its creations. So if this is true, now we are using technology to build simulations. And we've only had computers, Danica, really high-speed computers. We've had them for maybe 40 years. And look at where we are now. We are creating simulations that are almost indistinguishable from everyday life. So the question now that scientists are asking, this is where the really intense podcast gets really, really intense. It's called the forbidden question. The forbidden question is, are we living in what is called a base reality, or are we living in a virtual reality or a simulated reality that is reflecting a base reality somewhere else? Now, a lot of people think, well, this is science fiction. If consciousness informs itself through its creations, and we have made all of these movies about these simulations, what are we asking ourselves to remember? So where this really took a turn, I mean, it's interesting, conversation at Starbucks until 2001. 2001, the first scientific experiments were run, and a paper was written by a man named Nick Bostrom, and maybe you've had him on the program, or other people have referenced him, I don't know. But he asked the question. He said, are we living in a virtual reality? And he set up a very complex algorithm and ran the algorithm on the computer. And the bottom line is that the odds are greater that we are in a simulation than that we are not in a simulation. So that was 2001. 2014, this went further. And they began a series of physics experiments regarding reality. And this is one of the first, as you were covering all of the ground, what is our relationship to reality? And the bottom line to these experiments is what they found is that our physical reality only exists when something is observing it. And this ties back to experiments that were done early in the 20th century called the double slit, very famous double slit experiments, that atoms or quantum particles will behave one way when they're not being observed, and they will behave another way when they are. When they're not being observed, they're waves that you can't see. When they are observed through a camera or a recording mechanism or human consciousness, then those waves collapse into particles that become our reality. Where this gets really interesting is this is precisely the way we build our simulations today. Our computers can't hold, if you're going to have a simulation of a jungle, your computer cannot hold all of the information to make every leaf and all the bark on all the trees and all the insects and the rocks and the water in that jungle and just hold it there when it's not being used. So the computer doesn't do that. The computer only puts those there when that part of the simulation is going to be used. The experiments strongly suggest that our reality works in a very, very similar fashion, and that the odds are greater that we are than that we are not living in some kind of a simulation or a simulated reality or a virtual reality.